with money, more access, more but in order to have an impact, I thought, well, I ideally also need leverage through very, very large markets. So I started off by looking at government budgets. I thought, okay, so where does the world actually spend its money? And what you're seeing here is a cut, and generally across the board, this applies to almost every country in the world. Military, health, and education are the three largest sectors in terms of GDP spend. And I thought, okay, military, do I want to invest more? I know you could also say defense and security and all that sort of stuff, but it was nothing really that appealed to me. Now, health and the related areas, you need a lot of money to make a dent in there. Plus, my background is law and not science, so I wasn't so sure if that was the right thing. But then also I looked at that little dude and I thought, well, this could actually be quite a cool thing. So I started to look at education a little bit deeper. Now, 5% of the world's GDP is spent on education. That's the blended average of it. Although I think this is World Bank data, yeah. And if you're looking for data on markets and that sort of stuff, generally, it is very, very highly recommendable. The really interesting thing is that better education correlates directly to a higher GDP. So you basically have the opportunity to lift whole countries and nations and continents with smart investment in the education sector. This was confirmed by many studies. I picked one from Harvard. I posted the link to the download. I'll make my slides available later on, so don't worry. And it is very, very, very clear that you can lift outcomes. Now, when you then start running the numbers, the global GDP per annum amounts to $76 trillion. Anyway, so in other words, monstrous market size. It is, of course, slightly fragmented, as in everything. But here are a number of reasons to invest in education and make use of that, of a share of that enormous market. First of all, the education sector sees amazing growth. And that is true for investment in the private sector as well. And the largest category is e-learning. So here in terms of growth, so here at a tech conference, and specifically the mobile conference, that is something we will be seeing 23% compound annual growth for the foreseeable future, despite budget cuts and all that sort of stuff. And the impact this can make, I'd like to show you on one example, and that shows the poorest continent of them all. And you can then imagine what that would make and say about other markets. Well, have a look at Africa. So Africa's GDP is just under $2.5 trillion. If we could lift that GDP by 20%, as Harvard has shown is the average that we would, it's actually a bit higher, it's 21.3. That would equate to $500 billion in incremental GDP on an annual basis. Well, you only need a very, very small slice of that to have an extremely profitable business, and you will also know that you've actually have been changing people's lives. But it's also education's a proven market. It's not that it's something new. I mean, it's been around forever. When you, for instance, have a look at the world's largest publishers, as in the guys who started off in print and all that sort of stuff, almost all of them are education publishers. The red ones, almost exclusively, the yellow ones with a very, very heavy interest in them. And this is not a subset, this is the world's largest publishers. It's also a market that is highly vibrant. This is a snapshot only of the higher education landscape as it was in 2014. I couldn't find an equally confusing graph for last year. And when you zoom in a little bit, you will see that there's a couple of really, really large companies actually playing in that sector already. So, it's not that no one has actually realized that. EdTech is so cool, it even has its own Gartner hype cycle. How's that? And the big boys have rolled in and are rolling in. Google did a very, very clever thing. It took a ton of its existing products and added a classroom dashboard style thing for teachers, and that was the first Google for education. EdTech also has its own unicorns, and tons of them, and quite a few of them you may actually never have heard of. Qtone, the one in the top left corner, is worth more than $4 billion. And they're a Chinese company. They're used by teachers, parents, and students alike to catch up. Who would know? More established players are the learning company. You probably may have picked up on Lynda.com's acquisition by LinkedIn last year. And there's many more that are growing horns. Hopefully the next generation of those you might actually be seeing in the panel discussion that follows this. My apologies. But when it comes to, we're all running startups here, and we're a little bit afraid that the market will fall out. It doesn't look like this is going to happen in the EdTech sector. EdTech was underinvested for a while, and then saw an onrush all of a sudden when people saw that, and the big MOOCs were a leader there, but the people saw that you can actually build a business in that sector that is a high growth one, and actually can return a lot of capital. Last but not least, you can even win a Nobel Prize before you even get your driver's license. So this is all big talk here, but how do you then unlock that value in the education pipeline? Now, Einstein was alleged to have said that education is not the learning of facts, but the training of minds to think. And you could say with robots just around the corner, AI coming forward in huge leaps and bounds, that will become more and more important as we go. Because if I have all the knowledge in the world on my phone, it's only really a question of finding that and of applying it, right? Now, what Einstein really said, however, this was from an exchange he had with Thomas Edison, who sometimes had said that the liberal arts college is rubbish and no one should bother to do this, is that quote. And I'm not going to read it out for you, but it's what I did. So I had a look at that and I thought, okay, then let's have a look at what elements of education are actually hidden in that quote. And with a bit of mind mapping and wild thinking, all of a sudden you can start to extract elements of that where you can actually build a business model. All of a sudden it doesn't sound as fuzzy anymore, where you say, how on earth are you lifting the world's GDP? But hey, can we do something on distance learning? Sure we can. Do you have any idea on video delivery to mobile phones, etc.? Of course you can. So all of a sudden when you break it down that way, it is much, much easier to visualize the actual opportunities that lie hidden behind that big model that is the overall sector. Mobile. I will not be speaking about that because this is the sister event of the Mobile Congress, and if you're here and you're not convinced of the power of mobile and that it has already in everyone's lives, I suggest you go home, read a good book, because now access is a huge issue, right? Access to knowledge is for me easy because I'm a Western European and I have a smartphone and I have relatively reliable connectivity. And I grew up in a country with a very well developed education system with libraries in every town, etc. However, that is not always necessarily the case. And there are a couple of companies, there's one called Buzu, and they teach languages to people around the world remotely. Because guess what? When you're living somewhere where you might not have access to, let's say, a world-class English teacher, how on earth are you going to do that? There's another company, Plan, who are looking at it from a slightly different angle. We're saying, look, you know, if you're a Stanford computer science grad, will you have any issue finding a job and developing your career? Probably not. But in the large subsector of people who may not actually have a university degree or a college degree, they might find that much harder. And what they will find very often quite hard is to even identify what skills is it they need in order to build the career they want. So Plan is trying to help them with that. The next one is content discovery. You know, I was alluding to that huge amounts of information that is out there. You know, an exabyte, very large number. You can store the printed content of the Library of Congress, which is the largest in the world, easily on 100,000 times. Now, last year we transacted more than 1,000 exabytes of information on the internet. You know, that's 100 million times the Library of Congress. How on earth are you going to stay on top with all that information? Now, enter someone like you, who's a really large company already, and Bibblio, which for the time being is still a slightly smaller one. But so Newton does a personalized learning platform. So they basically try and discover patterns in the learner's progress and then serve them the content that that progress suggests is best for them at that time. Bibblio builds a knowledge graph around learning content. So you know, where Facebook and Google try to understand the user really well, Bibblio understands content much better, which again aids discovery. Creativity will, in the age of the robot and AI, become a hugely important part because creativity is something machines actually struggle with a little bit. So there's a company like Howdo. They simply help you find the best courses in your town, and this can be anything from art and pottery and to photography or coding. PyTalk goes in with kids. It's a 3D printable Raspberry Pi based completely modular laptop. Now, the last thing is thinking. Because if we can agree that critical thought and creativity will be the mainstays that humans have to offer to the machines in defense of our own livelihood. So how on earth do you approach thinking as a business category, right? Now, Macat is a UK-based company. They're basically trying to extract the world's greatest scholars, or the content rather, of the world's greatest scholars in a way that is comprehensible to more people, and thus promote the ability and general level of people to think. Gems Education, one of the unicorns, they build schools and operate schools and a whole education system. Now the interesting thing is they launched in the Middle East first. And have, for instance, a huge focus on a multicultural outlook and on the inclusion of women, which, when you are living in the Middle East, is not actually something that is as normal as you would have it in Western Europe or some other countries. So after all this, you got to ask yourself, why isn't everyone doing it? Because it seems if you look at it that way, it seems to be such an obvious thing. And the answer is fear. Because most of us, and that included me before I started looking into that, it's you go, well, what education? It's such a heavily regulated sector. Last but not least, children are very vulnerable beings, and we need to protect them. It's also that it's a sector that's very, very often dominated by the state or nations, and they tend to be in control. They tend to be quite bureaucratic. They're also afraid of the slow pace of the systems. You have that whenever a system grows to a certain size, it tends to slow down a little bit, to try and bring change to the sector. Makes it feel very daunting, which is what some people think well, maybe that's not something where you can achieve venture returns because it's too slow. The next one is really super complex. There's many different curricula out there, etc. By the way, this is the tube map of Tokyo, so they know a bit about complexity. All this then makes it feel as if it's basically impenetrable. How on earth can a small, fast-moving startup make an impact in that world, with its centuries-old traditions and systems? Because, you all know one does not sit. However, let's go back and say, look, we've all read out many startup books, so let's apply that, and let's apply the agility and the nimbleness that we can have. And one strategy that works really well is, rather to basically going to walking straight into mortar on your own, start rocking around those systems. And again, when you apply a map of the various parts of the ecosystems that there are, you will all of a sudden realize that the education sector is not actually a public sector. There is a huge private sector next to it, and you can start aiding education generally. Now the system will be changing, and by the time it does, you will already be there, and that will then allow you to walk in there much more quickly. The thing also is, the education guys, they know they need to improve. This is a study that only came out about 2 weeks ago, and it even gives you a how-to guide on what is it that you need to change. Over all of this, we should not forget that teachers are real heroes, and they work in a superbly tough environment. Schools themselves see budget cuts and see their resources deprived. Teachers have a frontline job, really shitty pay, and increased responsibilities. It's now as a teacher you're required to try and pick up if a child is unwell, prevent bullying, do this, that, the other, and try and teach 30 kids or so the curriculum that was given to you. Very, very hard. Parents, likewise, there's more double earners and single-parent families, and they juggle so many balls anyway. They are all well-meaning and want their children to perform well and do well. And there's a ton of things that we can solve with technology, not with technology alone, but also with technology that can improve that, and you can build very profitable businesses in that. And then last but not least, the systems, they are regulated, and they move slower than the private sector. But guess what? That's also a good thing for us because you can always outperform the public sector system. And what that all means is the education system actually tells you, look guys, just come and hug us and maybe, and start working around us and with us to improve it because they know it. 10 years ago, I would have said, okay, there's a couple of challenges that we have that may have prevented us from putting this into effect in a good way. However, today, technology is there. We have everything that we need in order to be able to beat the system, so to speak. We have device availability and bandwidth in more and more areas of the world. Even very remote and rural parts are now basically being provided. Mobile plays a huge part on that, simply because it's not everyone has a $1,000 computer at home on their table, but people tend to have phones, all of them. We now have the ability to deploy and work with big data in a meaningful way, which provides us real-time feedback loops, which again in turn allow us to constantly improve, to start to actually focus on individual learners' needs rather than deploying an industrial age-style system that is a one to fit all. We have the analytics to play with it. AI and machine learning come forward so quickly. And then last but not least, there has been a lot of discoveries been made in the neuroscience and pedagogy departments that actually help make education much more effective as it is. So, the market's there, tech is ready, time is now, guys, because, you know, it is true entrepreneurs. Really get shit done, but with a difference. Thank you. Got 3 minutes and 21 seconds for questions. Do we have a mic? Sorry guys, do we have a mic? Someone wants to ask a question.
Hi, thanks for the lecture. Very quick question. How do you scale offline courses or interactions offline? How do you make that scalable?
Print many books. Now, I think the interactivity of offline, that's a challenge because you have feedback loops where there's lots of bumps in the road. But the scalability of offline is done every day in every school in the world in classrooms. You know, it's when a teacher works with 30, 40 students. Project-based learning in smaller student groups kind of reinforces that. But they are natural barriers that are not that easy to overcome. But I think it's the interaction between an online environment and an offline environment. That's where the real power is being deployed. Because it's when you have a classroom, you have all those resources. That is that's one thing, and there's a ton of improvement to be done there. But the bigger need, I think, is for areas where we don't have it. And that's where I'm suggesting that online component there can help hugely and improve outcomes because you start at much lower levels than we would in some other areas of the world.
Hi. One question. When it comes to paying in education, who would be the one that works better for paying? Is it the teacher, the master, the parent? What would be where should we focus better?
It very much depends on your product. One data snippet for you. In China, 8% of the household income is spent on extracurricular activities. So that's parents and grandparents, one-child policy. Basically making sure that the education of their precious child is being absolutely maxed. It's a very high number. You have other areas where where there might be schools. There might be publishers, by the way, in certain cases because they are old, slow-moving beasts as well. We need some help on that. Or indeed teachers. Teachers is one thing. They're not being paid very well. However, if you can come to a teacher and say, look, I can save you 2 hours of after-class work time a day or a week, that's a quite compelling proposition. So it really depends on the product.
Hi. Can you see any future for augmented reality for education?
Sorry, what?
Can you see any future with the augmented reality or realidad aumentada?
I'm sure there will be, absolutely, yeah. Augmented reality, it's a bit of a crystal ball thing, right? But will certainly come into our lives at some stage and will help inform us on a ton of things in our environment and on demand when we need it. Even that clunky Google Glass thing, I could ask that to Google me something. So that is certainly something because when it comes to accessing knowledge, AR will certainly place. And for some more specific applications, when you go into vocational learning, I don't know, how to become a professional marine diver. You know, then all of a sudden you're in VR territory. Because there, you know, the deep immersive experience will just make it a little bit easier.
I have a question. Hi, I had this question of virtual reality. How do you see in the future the market in the 5 next years in education? And also, there is a statistic like say that the completion rates at the online courses are very low. How could we improve the completion rate, like to complete a course online, as there is no coaching and nobody to assess you?
I did a talk on that last year here. The trouble with the MOOCs is, or with the first generation, is that they basically deploy the same material that would normally be taught in a classroom, but they deploy it online. And what you have there, you break it. You know, if I'm a 10-year-old kid somewhere, you know, would I rather go play football or would I rather go do whatever numeracy? And there, it's my background. I spent a lot of time in the game space, when you apply what most people think of as gamification, whereas it's actually behavioral psychology. But there's a lot of behavioral psychology with triggers that you can design into applications that will actually make that a lot more compelling. So it's you know, I think that was a